Good morning. First day of April. Hopefully the winter is about to subside. It's been brutal this winter, but April usually brings in some milder temperatures. Thank you for joining my video blog today, When Worlds Collide. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about some things that have got me to thinking. It's in the middle of college basketball season at the NCAA tournament, and these are some of the things I've been thinking about, particularly as I've watched a video of the 1992 UNLV Running Rebels, who were this great basketball team back then. And they did a documentary on them and some of the controversies that stood out during their 4-year run as, well, they won one national championship, they lost another, but they were a great basketball team back in the early 90s. And it got me to thinking about sometimes we have these identities. They're not necessarily theologically or philosophically based, but they're based on other things. Let me give you an example. If you were to go to a church, let's say a Presbyterian church, which is what I went to in my previous church, they have a lot of theological distinctions, which make them Presbyterian. Yet also, if somebody were to say out during a sermon while the pastor's preaching, "Amen, brother," that just wouldn't fly in the church for the most part. And it's not because Presbyterianism says you can't say amen during a sermon or you can't be demonstrative inside the assembly. It's just something that Presbyterians kind of intuitively know. You don't do that as a Presbyterian, even though it's not a theological distinction. Presbyterians don't do this. And this can be said about, different ethnic groups. And I know I don't want to make generalizations necessarily, but, Italians generally act Italian to a good degree, and Irish may act Irish. And this goes on. I think you'll know what I'm getting if I just give certain quotes I might say. Let's say regarding if I met an Italian, they said they didn't like pasta. I'd say, what kind of Italian are you? It's just because you associate Italians with eating pasta. And if a black person doesn't eat fried chicken, you'd say, blacks don't eat fried chicken. Of course, these are great generalizations, but in life, generalizations exist because there's a great deal of truth to them. Now, here's what I want to get out with my blog. In this video of the UNLV basketball team, they came under a great cloud of suspicion during their run because, first of all, they were dominating teams. They had a great number of black athletes at the time. And there was also suspicion surrounding, their academic credentials. Although, when you really look back at the time, the athletes on the UNLV team were very similar to most big-time college basketball programs. They allow a lot of latitude into getting, students into the program. They may not be students, but they think they're going to, make a great basketball for the school, for the team. It's going to, create enthusiasm to the student body, bring in revenue for the school, and actually also excite, the neighboring communities in the state. And this is what UNLV basketball was doing for, at one time, a small basketball program that had become big time because of their coach Jerry Tarkanian and his recruitment of these kids. Well, over time, I want you to think about some things. About, let's say, for instance, you were a missionary going into a third world country, and you made a lot of converts to Christ while you were over there, and you wanted to form a church, let's say in Africa or some third world place. I think you would realize that as you create the church, you realize that it's not necessarily biblical, and it would not be prudent or wise to try to create a model of a church that's westernized. You wouldn't say, let's bring American Christianity into Africa. You would want the people to understand biblical Christianity, follow Christ, and all these other things that churches should do. But it doesn't necessarily have to be Western. Even if you're used to being Western as a missionary, you realize maybe African people or Middle Eastern people, whoever the audience may be, has to have their own cultural distinctives in the church. And you would say that's perfectly fine. You wouldn't say that's wrong. Well, the same thing can be held true about when we look at athletes. And like I said, there's exceptions to the rule, and I don't want to, paint with a broad brush that black athletes are a particular way and white athletes are not. But if you look back at, let's say, like celebration in sports, if you go back in football particularly, end zone dances, celebrations of this type of stuff happened by black athletes. The first known spike after a touchdown was done by Homer Jones in 1964 for the New York Giants. And the first arguably known end zone dance was by Elmo Wright of the Kansas City Chiefs in 1973. And Billy White Shoes Johnson later on became really famous for his end zone dances for the Houston Oilers. And what's the point I'm making here with this? Well, the point is this, at least my way of looking at it is, what one culture thinks is being a show-off, and that's not being a good thing, it's displaying bad sportsmanship or calling attention to oneself, may not be thought that way in another culture. And I don't think we can make a great distinction, or we can clearly say that, if an athlete, is flamboyant on the court or on the field, that's necessarily something, we should frown upon, even if we personally don't like it. I know, for instance, that going back to the UNLV Rebels, when they were a basketball team, they were a great team. They were really showmanship. They did a lot of slam dunking, high-fiving. There was a lot going on. They were also a highly disciplined team. They practiced very, very hard, and they played great defense, which led to them scoring 100 points numerous times at the college level, which was unusual in basketball, to be scoring hundreds of points per game at a regular pace. And that's what the UNLV Rebels did, because they played tough defense, and they worked hard, and they were coached well, and all these other things. But in many ways, they played a lot like the Harlem Globetrotters. Interestingly enough, a venue in basketball where most people, even white people, enjoy the Globetrotters, but they put on a show. And I think a lot of athletes, when they're black, feel like part of their role as an athlete is to be an entertainer as well as an athlete. And hopefully they practice hard, and that's another issue. If a player is undisciplined or is showing off and is not really dedicated to his craft, then you can argue, well, that's a bad thing. But if you have somebody like a Magic Johnson, who is certainly, showmanship on the court, but he was also a great team guy, did the right things, that he didn't just show off for the sake of showing off. And what I want to get into about UNLV basketball was this. During the whole controversy, when eventually, the team was going under suspicion for all these different violations, basically the state of Nevada was polarized. Many of the students didn't like the idea the basketball team was taking away from the academic nature of the school, and many of the fans, particularly the black fans of Nevada, were really, really furious about what was going on. They thought these players were being singled out and being bad guys, particularly because they were black athletes. And the newspapers and a lot of media, when they were playing Duke for a national championship, portrayed Duke as the good guy on the white horse, and UNLV, the black players, as thugs. And this is unfortunate and unfair, because as the late night comedian Jimmy Kimmel, I think, astutely pointed out, the main problem with people with UNLV basketball players, they were black kids with a ton of personality. That's what it was. They were all like Deion Sanders, Muhammad Ali types. Now, I can't make anybody like that type of athlete. You might like a particular athlete. That's your own choice, and you can root for whoever you want. But I think you got to realize this, that you really shouldn't paint this as a bad versus good issue. And I think this is what happened with UNLV, and this is what happens a lot of times when we have particular ideologies. It transforms to something that's less subjective, yet we, believe it. Back to the Presbyterian point, we'll all say, if people ask us directly, is it outlawed within Presbyterianism to say amen during a service? I mean, maybe some guys will write a thesis on that or a blog. I don't know. But I think most people would say no. But I think there are many people who are Presbyterians who, if somebody started coming to the church who was doing that, they would kind of frown upon it. They wouldn't look good. And many would say, well, he's the crazy uncle we keep in our church. Or maybe like a mascot type, but they're not going to kick him out, I don't think. But they would just feel like, we're better Presbyterians than that because we know the rules of the game. Likewise, if I've seen people who overheard conversations for charismatic people who decided to go into a traditional church, and they clearly thought, their way of doing things was superior because they were engaging their whole affections in the worship. They were all, amen, preach it, brother, dancing around and all this because they thought that was the way to go. Even though I don't think in a charismatic background, if you go to that church because you just believe the way things are done, you have to demonstrate it by having a charismatic persona. I don't think even they would argue that. In fact, they would probably try to downplay it. But these issues exist in us, and that's the thing I want you to think. That when you have an idea or a way of going about your life, whether it be your ideology, your philosophy, a lot of times that carries with it certain other things that you should be careful about, and and it can create elitism, snobbery, and a lack of humility. And that's the point I want to make. Hopefully you can think about that. And until next time, thank you for joining me, Johnny W. Bread. So long for today.